All right, everyone, let's get started. Think about this for a second. Some of the most powerful business relationships in the world are held together, not just by trust, but by paper. Apple and TSMC, the semiconductor manufacturer that makes Apple's chips, operate under long-term agreements where Apple commits billions of dollars year in advance. Boeing and its supplier negotiate multi-decade contracts. McDonald's and its food suppliers operate under carefully constructed long-term arrangements that keep your fries tasting exactly the same whether you are in Tokyo, Toronto, or even here in Muscat. So the question isn't it whether long-term contract matters. They absolutely do. The real question is how do you structure one well? What are the benefits? What are the traps? And what do you build into a contract to protect yourself when the unexpected happens? That's exactly what we are going to explore in this class. Well, we will cover 5 core areas. How to think about contract lengths, the real benefits of ongoing long-term contracts, the critical questions you must ask before signing the contract, the risks that can come back to bite you, and the contingency elements that every smart long-term contract should include. Let's dive in. So, the first question anyone asks when considering long-term contracts is pretty simple. How long is long-term exactly? Great question, and honestly, it depends. In business and supply chain management, contracts length generally falls into few categories. First, spot contracts, where purchases are made on non-repetitive or limited basis, where organizations have little or no intention of developing ongoing relationship. Then we do have short-term contract, which is less than a year, and often used for trial relationship or in stable markets. Medium term, it's 1 to 3, and it is the most common contract used for supplier agreements. Long term, it is from 3 to 10 years, used for strategic alliances, major supply agreements, and partnership requiring significant investments. Also, we do have very long term, 10 years and beyond, and this is common in infrastructure, utilities, aerospace, and defense. Now, here is what is interesting. There is no universal correct length. The right duration depends on a combination of factors, and this is where strategic thinking kicks in. The first factor is investment size and asset specificity. If one or both parties need to make significant capital investments just to fulfill the contract, like building a dedicated production line, purchasing specialized equipment, or developing custom software, a longer term is necessary. Why? Because no relation or no rational business is going to spend 20 million building a factory specifically for your product on a 1 year deal. The longer the contract, the more confidence both parties have to make those upfront investments. Economics call this asset specificity. The more specific the assets required, the longer the contract need to be justify the investment. The second factor is market stability. In stable, predictable markets, longer term are easier to commit because you have more confidence in what the future looks like. But in fast-moving markets, think technology, maybe cryptocurrency or commodity-driven industries. Longer contracts can actually become liabilities because conditions change very fast. So these um, trades like provide a trade-off between stability and flexibility. The third factor is about relationship maturity. And here let's think about new relationship. New relationships are riskier. You haven't built trust yet. You don't fully know your partner capability. The surprises are more likely. For this reason, many companies use shorter initial contract as a test drive before committing to longer terms. The fourth factor is industry norms. Different industries have very different norms. In defense sector, contracts of 10 or 20 years are routine. In retail, annual contracts are common. In IT services and outsourcing, 3 to 5 years is typical. Knowing what's normal in your industry matters because it sets expectations and provides benchmarks for negotiation. The fifth factor is strategic importance of the relationship. If this partner is core to your competitive advantage, they supply something unique, they have capabilities you cannot easily find elsewhere, or the relationship itself is a source of innovation, then a longer term makes more strategic sense. The more replaceable the relationship, the shorter the contract can be. Bottom line, when you are deciding on contract length, you are essentially making a bet on the future. A longer contract says, I am confident enough in this relationship, this market, and this partner to commit. A shorter contract says, I want to keep my options open. The art is finding the right balance between security and flexibility, and that's a judgment call that requires genuine strategic analysis. All right, let's talk about why anyone would want to sign a long-term contract in the first place. And I'll tell you, when done right, the benefits are great. Let's go through the major ones. The first benefit will be price stability and cost predictability. One of the most immediate and tangible benefits is locking in pricing for an extended period. Imagine you are a food manufacturer and the most or the main ingredient is wheat. If global wheat prices increase due to war or supply chain disruption, you are protected if you have already locked in a price through long-term contract. This makes budgeting for more accurate and protects your margin. Your CFO loves certainty. Long-term contracts provide exactly that. The second benefit will be supply security and continuity. Long-term contracts give you guaranteed access to products, services, capabilities that you depend on. In competitive market, the key suppliers sometimes ration their capacity to the highest bidder. If you are locked into a long-term agreement, you have priority access. This is huge in industries like semiconductors, aerospace component, or rare materials, where supply can become critically considered, and companies like Apple, Toyota have historically used long-term contracts precisely to secure supply before competitors can. The third benefit is a strong and more collaborative relationship. Here is a more clear benefit that students often underestimate. When two organizations commit to each other for the long term, some things shifts in how they interact. They invest more in understanding each other's need. They share more information. They solve problems together rather than pointing fingers. Research consistently shows that long-term partner relationships generate more innovation, better quality outcomes, and more efficient processes than transactional one-off relationship. Think about Toyota's famous system, their network of long-term partnerships. Toyota does not just buy parts from suppliers, they co-develop parts with them. They share engineers, they help suppliers improve their processes, and they create a deeply integrated ecosystem. That's the power of long-term commitment. The fourth benefit is reducing transaction cost. Every time you search for a new supplier, evaluate proposals, negotiate contracts, onboard a new partner, and manage the learning curve, you incur a cost. These are called transaction costs, and they are more significant than most people realize. Long-term contracts eliminate much of these overheads. You do the hard work once, and then you benefit from an established, smooth-running relationship. The longer the contract, the more you um, get upfront cost across the life of the agreements. The fifth benefit is competitive advantage through priority access. In some cases, long-term contracts can lock out competitors from accessing the same resources. If you have secured a long-term deal with one supplier of a critical component, your competitors have a real problem. This is a legitimate strategic weapon in competitive market. Think about how, for example, sport teams use long-term players contract. If you have signed the best players to long-term deal, your competitors cannot recruit them. Of course, unless they pay more. The sixth benefit is encourage mutual investments in innovation. Long-term contracts create the confidence for both parties to invest in innovation that is specifically enhances their shared relationship. As suppliers who know they will be working with you for 10 years, they will invest in dedicated research and development, custom process improvements, and capacity buildings on your behalf. They would never do that for a one-year deal. This creates a commitment that drives investment. Investment drives performance improvements, and performance improvement strengthens the relationship further. The seventh benefit is risk sharing. In many long-term contracts, risks are explicitly distributed between the parties. Volume fluctuation risk, currency risk, raw material price risk, and even technology obsolescence risk can all be allocated through contract terms. This means neither party bears all the downside alone. It is shared, which makes the overall arrangement more realistic and resilient. So, in summary, long-term contracts are not just administrative formalities when structured thoroughly. They become strategic assets that drive real financial, operational, and competitive values. Now, here where we get really practical. Before you sign any long-term contract, there are critical questions you absolutely must work through. Think of this as your due diligence checklist. The first question, what exactly are we committing to? This sounds basic, but you'd be amazed how many contracts fail because the scope of commitment is vague. Exactly what products, volumes, services, or capabilities are covered? Are there minimum purchase commitments? What are the performance standards? If it can be interrupted in two different ways, it probably be interrupted in two different ways, and that's when disputes start. The second question, what happens when condition changes? This is perhaps the most important questions of all. Business environment is not stable. It changes constantly. Prices change, technology changes, the demand changes, regulations change. A well-written long-term contract does not pretend the future is certain. It plans for uncertainty. Ask yourself, what triggers a renegotiation? Under what circumstances can terms be adjusted? What are the mechanisms for handling change in input costs, exchange rates, or market conditions? The third question is who owns what? And here we are talking about intellectual properties, IP. In alliances and partnerships where joint developments and co-innovation happen, IP ownership can become extremely important. Before the contract is signed, both parties must clearly answer who owns innovation developed during the partnership, who retain IP if the relationship ends. Can either party use shared IP in other relationships? Get this wrong and you can end up in costly legal battle that destroy years of collaborative works. The fourth question, how do you measure performance? A long-term contract without performance standards is like a job offers without a job description. You need key performance indicators, KPIs, and service level agreement, SLAs, that clearly define what good looks like. On-time delivery rates, quality defect rates, response times, cost reduction targets, whatever matter most to your relationship should be measured, tracked, and reported regularly. The fifth question is how do we resolve disputes? In any relationship that lasts years, disagreements will happen. The question here isn't it if, but when. Smart contracts answer this proactively. When the process for raising concerns, is there a formal escalation procedure? Will dispute go to mediation, arbitration, or litigation? Which law govern the contract? Having a clear dispute resolution mechanism dramatically reduces the cost and the damages when conflict arises. Question 6. What are the exit provisions? This one makes people uncomfortable, but it's absolutely necessary. Under what condition can either party exit the contract? What is the notice period required? Are there financial penalties for early termination? What happened to assets, inventory, and ongoing projects if the contract ends? A clear exit strategy protects both parties and actually makes the relationship more secure, not less, because both sides know exactly where they stand. Question 7. What if our partner gets acquired? This is especially relevant in today's mergers and acquisitions heavy business environment. Imagine you have built a 7 years partnership with a supplier and they get acquired by your biggest competitor. Suddenly, your partner is your competitor. Change of control clauses address exactly this scenario, giving you the right to renegotiate or exit if ownership changes in ways that conflict with your interest. The eighth question is, how does pricing evolve over time? Will pricing be fixed for the entire contract terms? Will it adjust annually based on inflation indices? Is there a mechanism for cost pass-through if raw material prices spike? Pricing mechanism needs to be thoughtfully constructed to be fair for both parties across the full duration of the contract, not just in the first year where everyone is happy. These questions aren't meant to create instability or problems. They are meant to create clarity and confidence. The best long-term contracts are the one where both parties have openly discussed the hard questions before signing, not after something goes wrong. So we have talked about the benefits and the questions. Now let's be honest about the risks. Because here is the truth. Long-term contracts can be extremely powerful, but they can also become anchors that drag you down if you are not careful. Let's walk through the major risks. First, lock-in and loss of flexibility. This is the big one. When you commit to a long-term contract, you are limiting your ability to change direction. If a better supplier emerges, new technology disrupts your industry, or your business model evolves, you might be stuck. The market doesn't care that you have a 5-year deal. It will keep moving with or without you. This is why flexibility provisions are so critical. More on that will be discussed in the next slide. The second risk is market price changes working against you. Lock-in cuts both ways. Yes, it protects you if prices increase, but what if prices fall? Imagine you locked in a 5-year contract for oil at 90 per barrel, and by the second year, the market price dropped to $55. You are now massively overpaying compared to your competitors who have spot contracts. Long-term price commitment can become serious competitive disadvantage if market conditions shifts unfavorably. The third risk is partner performance uh, degradation. Here is a risk that often underappreciated. When a supplier knows that your business for the next 5 years, if they are sure that they have that business, they might relax their performance standards, initiating supplier opportunism. They have already won the business, so what is the urgency? Compliancy is a real phenomenon in long-term relationship. Without robust performance management mechanisms, quality can drift, service levels can slip, and innovation can stagnate. This is why performance matrices and regular reviews are non-negotiable elements of any long-term contract. The fourth risk is technology obsolescence. This is a particular acute risk in technology-intensive industries. Imagine locking yourself into a 7-year IT outsourcing contract in 2017, and by 2020, cloud computing has completely transformed what is possible. Or signing a long-term contract uh, with a manufacturer that locks in a process that becomes obsolete due to automation. Long-term contracts can trap you in yesterday's technology when the world has moved in. The fifth risk is financial instability of your partner. And what happens if your long-term partners runs into financial crisis? If a key supplier goes bankrupt, your supply chain can collapse overnight. If an alliance partner faces financial crisis, the quality of their service will move to you. Long-term contracts create dependency, and dependency means that your partner's problem become your problem. This is why financial due diligence on your partner, not just at the start of the contract, but throughout its duration, is essential. The sixth risk is relationship deterioration. People have companies and people leave companies. Priorities change, leadership change. The champion of your relationship or partnership might be gone 2 years into a 10 years deal. New management might not value the relationship the same way. Cultural alignment that existed at the signing might change over time. Contracts can formalize a relationship, but they cannot guarantee the human elements like trust, communication, shared value. When the relationship behind the contract changes or vanishes, you end up with parties doing the minimum required by law rather than working as a true partner. So supplier may forego other businesses. Also, we do have a concentration risk. Relying too heavily on a single long-term contract creates dangerous concentration. If that one partner falls for any reason, you have no fallback. Best practice is to maintain some diversification in your supplier partner base. Even if you have preferred long-term contract, don't put all your eggs in one basket, no matter how attractive that basket looks today. The key takeaway on risks: none of these risks means you shouldn't do long-term contracts. They absolutely still make sense in many situations, but you need to go in with clear eyes, understand what could go wrong, and build protections into the contract itself, which leads us perfectly into the final topic. Risks don't arise from the supplier side. Buyers might be unreasonable or have unrealistic expectations as well. This is where strategy meets contract drafting. And honestly, this separates the professionals from the amateurs. Contingency elements are the built-in safety valves, adjustment mechanisms, and protective clauses that allow a long-term contract to adapt, flex, and survive in the world that never stops changing. Think of contingency elements like the suspension system on a car. The road ahead might be bumpy and unpredictable, but a well-built suspension absorbs the shocks and keep you moving forward. Here are the essential contingency elements every well-crafted long-term contract should include. The first element is the price adjustment and escalation clauses. Rather than locking in a single price for the entire contract duration, smart contracts include pricing formulas that adjust automatically based on agreed upon indices. For example, the price per unit will adjust annually based on changes in the price index or producer price index (PPI) for raw materials. This is fair to both parties. The second element is performance standards and service level agreement (SLAs). These are the contractual definition of acceptable performance. For example, supplier must maintain a minimum of 98.5% on time delivery rate, measured quarterly. SLAs create accountability and prove an objective base for conversation when performance falls short. Critically, they should include consequences for underperformance, financial penalties, readiness plans, or ultimately the right to exit the contract if performance falls all the time. The third element, renegotiating triggers. These are pre-agreed conditions that automatically trigger a formal renegotiation of contract terms. For example, if the market price of a primary input change by more than 20% from the baseline, either party may request a formal pricing renegotiation. Or if a regulatory change requires capital investment exceeding 5 million, both parties will renegotiate cost-sharing agreement. Renegotiation triggers prevent either party from being disadvantaged by events neither could have predicted, and they do it without requiring either party to breach the contract. The fourth element is force majeure provisions. Force majeure is a Latin for superior forces, covers events that extraordinary, unforeseen, and beyond the control of either parties. Think like natural disasters, pandemics, wars, or major government actions. COVID-19 brought these concepts into sharp focus for millions of businesses that had never thought much about it before. A well-drafted force majeure clauses specifies exactly what events qualify, what obligations are suspended, for how long, and what happened if situation persists. The fifth element is exit and termination clauses. As I mentioned in the question section, every long-term contract needs a clear exit strategy. Termination clauses can come in several forms. For example, termination for cause, the right to exit if the other party commits a material breach. Termination for convention. Termination for convenience. The right to exit with advance notice, typically with a financial penalty. Termination for bankruptcy. Automatic exit rights if the other party becomes in debt. Without a clear provision, exit provision, you can be trapped in a falling relationship with no clean way out, which often is worse than not having the contract at all. Sixth element, change of contract of control provision. As discussed in the question section, if your long-term partner gets acquired by a competitor, a foreign entity, or a company whose values conflict with yours, you need protection. A change of control clause gives you the right to be notified of ownership changes and typically provide the options to renegotiate or exit the contract with a defined window after such change happen. The eighth element is technology and innovation refresh clauses, especially relevant to technology-intensive contracts. These clauses require that the supplier keep pace with the technological advances. For example, supplier must upgrade or update technology platforms to current industry standards no later than 12 months after such technology becomes commercially available. This prevents your long-term contract from locking you into obsolete technologies while competitors benefit from the latest innovations. Also, dispute resolution mechanism, the following element. Rather than defaulting immediately to expensive, damaging lawsuit, well-designed contract specifies a graduated escalation process. First, direct discussion between operational team. If unsolved, then escalation to senior management. If it is still unresolved, then third-party mediation. Finally, binding arbitrations or legislations as the last resort. This structure saves both time and money while preserving the relationship whenever possible. The big picture on contingency element is, think of these clauses not as expressions of distrust, but as expression of maturity and practicality. The parties that built these elements into their contract are saying, we trust each other and we are smart enough to know the world will withdraw and will throw curveballs at us. Let's plan for that together. So let's bring it all together. Long-term contracts are one of the most powerful tools in the strategic business toolkit. When crafted thoughtfully, They create stability, security, and the conditions for deep collaboration that can generate real competitive advantage. They allow both parties to invest confidently, innovate, and operate efficiently in ways that short-term transactional relationship simply cannot support. But, and this is critical, a long-term contract is only as good as the thinking that goes into it. A poorly structured long-term contract can trap you in a bad relationship, expose you to significant financial risks, and limit your ability to adapt to a world that never stops changing. The best practitioners of long-term contracting understand three things, which are: first, the strategic value of the relationship, why it matters, what it enables, and how it creates competitive advantage. Second, the risk and the questions that must be honestly addressed before commitment, and the courage to ask the hard questions even when everyone is optimistic at the negotiation table. Third, the contingency mechanism that allow the contract to breathe, flex, and survive unavoidable surprises that time will bring. Thanks a lot for listening and wish you enjoyed it.